For hundreds of thousands of years, humans thrived as nomadic, egalitarian hunter-gatherers. It was only around 10,000 years ago that a few societies around the world began to experiment with sedentism, agriculture, and the hoarding of resources. These societies spurred feedback loops of growth, inequality, and environmental devastation, conquering and colonizing and domesticating everyone and everything in their path, causing the sixth largest mass extinction in the history of life on Earth. Today, we live in a world that is a mismatch of our evolution in more ways than one. We feel disconnected, isolated, and powerless. Can we find our way back to a life that better matches how humans ought to live? What can we learn about how to live well from other cultures who've figured it out? Is there time to reverse our self-destructive trajectory? How can we reclaim our wildness? These are the themes of the Rewilding podcast. I'm your host, Peter Michael Bauer. This podcast is produced and made possible from supporters on Patreon. Thank you. If the Rewilding podcast inspires you, gives you hope, or makes you think, please subscribe, share it on social media, and become a patron at patreon.com/Peter Michael Bauer. If you're new to rewilding or want to expand your perception of it, I recommend attending one of my Rewilding 101 workshops, which I offer both in person in Portland, Oregon, and online for those who live around the world via Zoom. You can check upcoming dates and register at rewildportland.com. Hunter-gatherers relied on megafauna for their subsistence. Those material conditions no longer exist. Most land is under the control of state or private individuals, and most of the megafauna are extinct. Rewilding looks to hunter-gatherers as an inspiration for adapting modern subsistence practices as best we can to be more like that of our evolutionary past. While domestication was a stark turn away from hunting and gathering, pastoralism as an existing subsistence strategy today is ripe for potential rewilding of various kinds. There are methods that combine human subsistence with ecological restoration to help increase biodiversity and carbon sequestration. A few of the current terms for this are regenerative agriculture, agro-forestry, silva-pastoralism, holistic grazing, among many others. In this episode, I'll be interviewing John and Laura from Future Oak Farms, who manage multiple sites in Ireland with multiple strategies. Laura and John, thank you for coming on the Rewilding podcast.
Pleasure, Peter. Thank you for having us.
My first question, and I've been I think I feel like I know the answer to this, but I've never officially asked the question, but what does Future Oak Farm mean to you?
So the origin story of this project is I'm a generational farmer and I grew up here. My dad was farming, a few hundred sheep on these mountains and a super conventional setup. So a load of chemical inputs in the form of herbicides and sort of antibiotics and preventative medical treatments for the animals. And I didn't see a future in it. So when I left, like generations before me, I kind of unwittingly repeated that pattern of emigration because I didn't perceive there to be much opportunity in these hills.
Mm-hmm.
That was kind of looking back, that was the subliminal messaging. But I was away for 15 or so years. I had an international career in oil and gas exploration, and I was increasingly becoming burnt out from that. And I would come back to Donegal for kind of a recharge, like a reset.
Mm-hmm.
So go hike a mountain or jump in a river or something, and kind of reset my system and go back into the rat race. But it was on one of these trips back that I realized that the mountain chain that I grew up looking at, the Derryveow Mountains, actually had a root. Their name had a root in the Irish language. Now, I'm not a Gaeilgeoir myself, but it was when I discovered that the name of these mountains was actually Crucht de Ravaha, which translates as the hills of oak and birch. It really set me off on a question, and it was where the hell are the oak and birch today? So Future Oak Farm and the Future Oak Project is about bringing those oaks back to the landscape.
I suppose for me, not being a generational farmer, being a new entrant to farming, and I suppose my first introduction to farming being through the work that John has been doing over the years, and then also being exposed to conventional farming from doing farming qualifications. I have a real kind of I suppose, attachment to the future part of it, particularly because we want to have a family. We want there to be a future in these hills for people that go beyond us. And this project isn't something that we're going to see completed, and we don't know what the end of it is. So that's what it really means for me.
Mm, hmm. Um, just to kind of, think about there's a question that often comes up in restoration and rewilding of like restoration to what? Oftentimes here in the Americas, it's sort of this like decolonial form of restoration where they're like, we're going to restore to like the way things were right before European colonialism or whatever. And some people are like, actually, we want to restore like 10,000 years ago or something. So in terms of like the oak restoration project, do you have like a framework in mind around what that looks like in terms of time, or is it just diversity, or do you know what I'm asking? Like, what is the?
Yeah, so we take a slightly different approach to some of the other kind of tribes of people out there that are working in the sphere of rewilding. So our philosophy is not to kind of pinpoint a particular moment in time and say, right, that's kind of what we're working towards or back to or forward to
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
however you want to frame it. Our philosophy is slightly different. Our philosophy is based on the belief that a system will express itself differently depending upon how elements of the broader system interplay with each other. And the biggest uh, agent for change in the last 1,000 years or so on the island of Ireland has been man.
Hmm.
So just
Mhm.
by what we found on the farm here is like one of the first concrete changes that we started playing with is seeing ourselves as part of a system. When I grew up in a conventional farming model, so it was one of domination really, and it was one of controlling parasite cycles through the administration of medication and the like. But there was no thought about how an animal interacted with the ecosystem or how that ecosystem responded to the presence of the animal. And like that was a big philosophical kind of mindset shift for me that has kind of informed the project here. So what we do is in very real terms, in tangible terms, is we bunch and move animals. And we do every day of the year. So our animals we're a zero input farming system. They never see a shed, they never see a bale of hay, and we only kind of get them in to handle them once a year when they're required for their annual kind of medical checkup. Um, the second thing is, as long as the system is growing in complexity, as long as it's getting more and more complex year on year, and we can measure that really easily, then we can put our hand on our heart and actually say that all the data supports that we are regenerating the system. So it's not necessarily important to us where the system regenerates to. But the things that show up in a regenerating system are symptomatic
Hmm.
of the interplay between us and the livestock that we're farming. And one of those symptoms actually is oak showing up in the system again that hasn't been planted. So we've actually moved away from planting broadacre tree systems on the farm because when the conditions are right, they just show up.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
to that point, in terms of, the regeneration, and, what we kind of want to see more complexity. So looking previously in time, looking to the factors that have went through time to give us a degenerated landscape, what things have happened to make things less complex. And when we look historically, there are the 3 points of inflection, where we have the reintroduction of a non-indigenous red deer herd locally. We have the intensification of sheep farming and the removal of people from the land in a very brutal colonialist way. And then we also have the removal of a key predator species, the removal of the wolf. So the system that we have now is trying to plug those gaps, where we have no predator, we become the predator, we bunch and move when we use fences to create that ecological
Dynamic.
dynamic. And then whenever we're looking to give rest to the land. We're reducing that intensification of sheep farming. And crucially, we're bringing more people to the land, and then also we control the deer here as well. So we're trying to take away those elements that have degenerated the land and then bring it into a regenerative state.
Awesome. Yeah, to me that's like real rewilding. The sort of idea of trying to replicate a certain environment from a certain time period by planting things back and thinking that the system itself will just, run without any human inputs. One of the biggest mistakes I think
Mm.
conservationists in terms of
Oh,
conservation rewilding have realized is that like here in the Americas, they'll replant a space with native plants from 200 years ago, and 10 years later, it's completely filled with invasive species because
yeah.
they don't have the anthropogenic aspect. They don't have the human interaction. They don't have, there's so many different variables that you can't just think that you're going to create this box and it's going to stay the same. Like it's just not an intact thing. Ecosystems are dynamic. So I think like what you guys are doing is more along the lines of like a realistic approach to a return to wildness or a return to a more biodiverse place. Um,
And the kind of like I often say, and people often take it as a joke, but it's not. It's really not a joke. Like the word that I really hate most is the word sustainable,
mm,
and the word that I hate second most is conservation. Because
mhm.
we can look out at these bare mountains and speak to the conservation of this niche habitat, but in reality, the expression of the ecosystem as it currently is today and as it has been for the last couple of hundred years,
Mm.
actually is an expression of an ecosystem that's on its knees because it's lost so many of those dynamic
Mhm.
drivers of complexity from the system. So for us to then apply a conservationist mindset to this system, it's kind of like saying, "Oh, you've got a really cool niche form of cancer in your body. Let's not treat it. You know, let's
Let's
just
keep it and study it.
Right.
let's keep this and study it. You know, let's really look
Yeah.
at it. Meanwhile, you're like, hey, I'm on my knees here,
Yeah.
Hmm.
and where that fits into where I see, because we balance everything here against a triple bottom line, and this is
Mhm.
kind of a foundational philosophy of holistic management, which we're practitioners of here. And the triple bottom line is ecology, economy, and people.
Mhm.
So where that bio or that ecological complexity translates into the economy of a modern farming system is in the face of a changing climate.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Because here on the Atlantic margin, what we're seeing is we're not seeing our average annual rainfall go up much, although it seems like it, but it's not really happening. The data doesn't support that. But what the data supports is that when we have times of drought, they're more protracted and they're more intense. So the ability for us to kind of sequester water and actually store it
Hmm.
within a living carbon column within the
Mhm.
soil is really, really important. And the way we do that is by driving complexity in our grassland systems. And similarly, when the rain events come or when those storm events come, we get bigger downfall pours in much shorter time periods. So the ability for a landscape and a farming system to actually take that shock, absorb it, this is the true definition of resilience, and then to sequester that water rather than seeing it run off and cause issues downstream for, towns and villages and neighboring farms
Hmm.
is absolutely key. And at the root of all of this, if you will pardon the pun, is really good grazing management.
Yeah. So yeah, it's funny, when I had like what my idea of Ireland was going to be like before I went over there, and then I my first experience was taking the bus from Dublin to your place, basically, and it was just interesting being like, oh, this just kind of looks like the countryside in the States. It's like cattle,
Yeah.
tree farms, and suburban sprawl. And then I was kind of like, I don't really know what those like sort of bald spots are. And then later, I learned it's the heather bogs and stuff. And it was really cool to get to your spot and see the some of the restoration going on both on your property, but also like across the way, there's that more diverse forest there on the lake. But um, yeah, so in terms of like the sequestering of rain and all this, what are this is sorry, this is off the cuff and not a question that was on our
All
scheduled
right.
So good.
Shoot.
our predetermined questions, but Yeah, what are ecosystems there in Ireland that can take that water shock and store it? And is the bog something that can do that? Like, is the bog, I know that's not necessarily a natural occurring thing either in terms of its the bogs are in a large part created by cattle and deforestation and the lack of wolves and things like that. Am I correct?
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's an element of it. So we tend to throw terms like bog out,
Yeah.
and everything that has an ineffective water cycle, anything that is acidic in the soil column, and anything that exists that exhibits a certain kind of community of plants, we call it a bog. And realistically, there's a wee bit more nuance to it than that. I
Mm.
mean, wherever you get water settling within a landscape, at low points. And if you look at Ireland as a kind of 3D model, it is bowl shaped. So the
So,
Midlands of
Mm.
Ireland are actually,
Hmm.
the mountain ranges on the kind of Dublin Mountains and into the Wicklow Mountains on the east coast, and then Galway, kind of Mayo
Mm.
down into like Tipperary and places they're kind of funneling that water into the middle before it goes out. And you will end up with that landscape and that topography, you will end up with bog creation in those areas. But where it goes a little bit um, off track, if you like, is what I term like anthropocentric bog. Like it's bog created by human activity, and part
Hmm.
of that you've already touched on, which is the removal of that predator-prey dynamic. And then populations of herbivores grow up, and if you do have a complex woodland, primary woodland system, the first thing to disappear from those systems under increased grazing pressure, of course, are the young, the saplings of that community. Um, but trees and shrubs and grasses are like nature's pumps, so they're constantly evapotranspirating water. They're pulling them up through deep-rooted structures and then pulling up through plant matter out into the atmosphere. And then we have herbivores that come through and graze them off and trample them down, and then the cycle continues. And trees and shrubs are doing exactly the same thing as grasses. Now, when we remove trees and shrubs through overgrazing from these systems, nature no longer has the mechanism necessary to begin cycling this water through a
Mm.
soil column. And that's where we end up with water stagnating. You get a shift in pH, you get a lockup of certain nutrients within the soil column, different biology shows up. And then, as an expression of all those dynamic interplays, then certain plant communities show up, which that's how a system exhibits itself as bog or wet heath. So bog in certain places, and typically it's hillsides, it's anywhere with a
mm,
wee bit of gradient to it. When you see bogland species showing up on that, we sometimes term it wet heath if we want to be really accurate. But
mm,
Mm.
it's a system that I, as a regenerative farmer and a grazier, I can push that system using animal impact forward in succession, like towards pioneer woodland, to help restore some of those water cycling capabilities, or I can push it backwards in succession and actually get water functioning through a grassland system, actually encourage grassland species to show up. And that is the role that is the role that we're constantly playing. We look at a niche habitat on the farm, on any farm,
mhm.
and you can do this anywhere on the planet. And we say, okay, where is it in succession? What are the stages ahead of it? What are the stages behind it? And then the second question then needs to be, where do I want it to go, or where do I need it to go? Like this is a core philosophy that we've developed here, which kind of makes us, into our mind at least, makes us regenerative agriculturalists. And then once you've identified where you want that system to go, either ahead in succession or backwards in succession into a grassland system, then it's about selecting the most appropriate tool to achieve that end.
Whenever we're working with farmers and we're explaining this concept, they're so used to a prescription of what's right, what's wrong.
Mm.
Um, so what we're doing is giving them a lens to see their landscape and to also know their own context and what they're trying to achieve. If they, for example, our context, we have the triple bottom line where we look at the social, so the people, the environment, and also the profitability. So that goes into every decision that we make. So we're working with a dynamic system with a very particular set of glasses that we've developed. And then that means that we have our indicators for success and there are indicators that we don't have success, and we can make those dynamic decisions on the day.
This is sort of a funny question to me because I don't have a problem with eating meat. But I know, in the contemporary era, a lot of people think that growing animals or animal agriculture is, one of the leading causes of climate change, for instance. And so there's a lot of like a turn towards veganism or plant-based diets as a way of avoiding the increase in carbon. And I know that there's a lot of opinions around that, especially in regenerative agriculture. So I'm just curious if you want to touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, I suppose the usual tagline is it's not the cow, it's the how. So I suppose for me to wear the hat of farmer in Ireland, I had to do a qualification called the Green Cert, which was conventional agriculture, bearing in mind how I was introduced to agriculture, completely different system. So for the title of farmer, it was 18 months of visiting conventional farms, standing in sheds, working through their system. So I have a very good idea of what the conventional system is. And it is a business, it is a factory. It's also farmers want to do the best for their animals, but they're locked into a commodity system. And whenever you're locked into a commodity system, you have to try and make the books balance. And with that, they're, using antibiotics. The animals are in for 6 months out of the year in Ireland in a shed, which is not healthy conditions. But this is a system that is deemed to be the best way of agriculture that has been taught. So people are doing the best of what they can do with what they know. Um, and I can understand someone being an ethical vegetarian whenever they may have walked through an animal shed. I can understand that entirely. That makes sense to me. Knowing what I know, and obviously having access to some of the most beautiful regenerative meat, I feel very lucky that I have the choice to eat in this way. So aligning my beliefs with my eating habits. And of course, you could get into the whole dynamic between the price of this and how it kind of causes classes in terms of our
Mm.
consumption of food. Um, Not everyone has the privilege to eat regenerative organic meat, and that's a sad thing, and that it's not more accessible. But our hope is through proving that this is a profitable system for the farmer and it is producing food for people, that more people will take up this form of farming, and with more supply, there'd be more availability of
Hmm.
that meat as well.
Like you have to understand as well in the Irish context. So since kind of the 1950s, 1960s, since the end of World War II, the artificial synthesis of nitrogen, our ability to chemically influence production systems, the work of Norman Borlaug, the father of the Green Revolution,
Mhm.
um, science has been kind of pedestalized as the way forward. And of course, the issue with science is that scientific studies don't deal well. They don't have a framework or a mechanism to deal well with complexity. So instead, what they do is they take this complex dynamic system where it's actually, once you get above two or three nodes in any kind of network, it becomes really difficult to map all of the interrelationships and actually figure out what the root cause of a certain expression is within the system. So try to do that under a system that has many, many thousands of nodes in a network and interrelationships, as well as transient nodes, um, animal effect, for example, the herd effect of animals moving through. And it becomes impossible. So when faced with this overwhelm, what science does is it draws a ring fence around a very discrete aspect of that system and actually tries to reduce it through to the lowest common denominator through a methodology that's called reductionism or determinism.
Hmm.
And this is the biggest challenge as well, because what we're fighting against is a paradigm that has been held for 70, 80 years here in Ireland. And there's been one agency that has kind of been held up as the shining light of best agricultural practice. And that's where everybody goes, or used to go, for their information. What do I need to do next? So there was a really interesting transition, and I witnessed it. So I witnessed it when I was growing up here on this farm, because my father, who had a career outside of Ireland and then came back and started to farm again in his 40s. And I was part of that family unit here growing up as well. Whenever there was a question, he would call the man. There was always a man on the end of the phone, and they were the scientists.
The man with the
Mm.
shirt.
And that's where the knowledge was held. But
Mm.
I remember just the generation before that. I remember my grandfather's generation and him saying things like him looking up at the ash tree, and if he could still see daylight through the leaves of the ash tree, then it was still time enough to plant spuds.
Hmm.
So in just that transition from one generation to the other, people have become disconnected and actually kind of cut off from their ability to observe
Mm.
and to make decisions, which on balance are
Hmm.
good for your entire system through direct observation. Instead, we had to lift up a phone or go to a meeting and speak to somebody that had letters after their name.
Hmm.
So what I've witnessed in my short time farming, and I'm farming here less than 10 years, is it's actually a reclamation of some of that
Mm.
autonomy, of some of that power. And dare I say it, it's largely through social media.
Mm.
We've got farmers out there that are not relying on, peer-reviewed studies that take 10 years to get through a system, but are going out there and trialing stuff on the ground, but looking for the earliest possible opportunity for feedback to confirm
Hmm.
that they're on the path to regeneration, or they're on the path to a system that's degrading, and to iterate kind of on the fly. And
Mm.
it's a very lean, adaptable, evolutionary process, but that's the philosophy that underpins almost everything that we see. And that's why it's also too simplistic to say, oh, animal agriculture
Right.
is the problem, because it's not even nuanced. It's so vastly, gapingly stark. Yeah, a pound of beef from a system that has high inputs, and all you're trying to do is keep an animal alive long enough so that it hits an economically viable kill weight, is very different from a system like ours, which is the right animal in the right place at the right time for the right reason. So the animals never see a shed, never see any kind of feed inputs at all. They're allowed to express their full social dynamic in a herd year round. And then when the time comes, they have one bad journey, they have one bad day.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And it's interesting because what we're really talking about, I guess, is moving from disempowerment to empowerment. So that, farmers have a lot more kind of interrelationship and say in stewarding their land. And from that, you can tell if an animal is happy. And I'm sorry you can, and that's definitely something that I can see in our herds and herds that are managed in a similar sort of way. You can see animals that are exhibiting natural behaviors, that are medicating whenever you give them the right forage. Whenever you have willow there, has an aspirin
Hmm.
element there, they'll go to it. They'll go to nettles whenever they need them. So I think giving animals the opportunity to express that behavior rather than locking them in an asylum of a shed,
Yeah,
Hmm.
a beautiful thing to do.
yeah, it's very sad.
I hope you're enjoying this episode of the Rewilding podcast. I wanted to pause and make a request for your support. This podcast is made possible by donations on Patreon. With so much media filled with misinformation and outright lies these days, small, independent podcasts like mine are some of the only ones left striving for brave, truthful inquiry. I need your support to continue bringing you thoughtful, hopeful discourse on human resilience. Please become a patron of the podcast at patreon.com/Peter Michael Bauer. Thank you for keeping my project going. The world needs this.
That point, Laura, about animals self-medicating, the point you made, it always makes me think about like Lucy's groups, or or like seeing you guys at
Foraging,
Clwyd
yeah,
Linus, and you're working your way along the hedgerows and you're taking what you need, and the cattle do the same thing.
they do.
Mm.
Do.
They
And at
do.
different times of the year, they're like one of the phenomena, which is just really easy to observe, but we've observed it consistently, is when we bring them down off high ground at the end of the winter, they'll go straight. If there's a nettle patch anywhere, they'll go straight for it and they'll just strip. And this is
Mm.
the same thing that my ancestors used to do here. That we would go through this purging.
Mm.
They would use plants like bog bean and nettle as well to kind of purge the system after a winter to get ready for the spring.
Mm-hmm.
You bring that same herd of cattle a month later or 6 weeks later back into the same paddock, and they won't turn a blind eye. They'll turn a blind eye completely to the nettles. They'll walk through them. They'll walk around them. Not interested at all. But there's a specific moment in the
Mm.
annual cycle where they will medicate, and they do remind me of
Foragers.
foragers.
But
Yeah.
where you have a system that is just perennial ryegrass, you don't see
Yeah.
that. You
Mm.
don't see that behavior
Mm.
because they don't have an opportunity. And therefore you're
Yeah.
cutting maternal line of educating the calves coming through as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
So that's how I suppose they lose that survival
Yeah.
instinct.
You're reminding me, this is a sort of an absurd example or connection, but you're reminding me of like I've let my backyard go wild and it's sort of a rabbit sanctuary now. And in like February, the reason I even figured out that there were rabbits back there is that I had ignored when pandemic lockdowns happened, I turned my backyard into a garden, and then like a year later was lazy and stopped kind of harvesting things. And come the winter time, I looked back and the chard had been like eaten all the way down to the ground. And I realized that there were rabbits kind of like living in the backyard and they were eating a lot of my vegetables and stuff. And at first I was upset because I was like, those are my vegetables. I don't have rabbits eating them or whatever, And then I was like, you know what? I'm not even eating them right now. Who cares? Like, and there's like wild animals out here that need them too. There was like a three-legged coyote that lived in our neighborhood somewhere, and I'm like, that coyote's got to eat too. But I had planted some like wild foods for myself in the yard as well. And it was funny that watching the rabbit like select different plants throughout different times of the season, like they were really into dandelion flowers, which I thought was funny because everybody hates on dandelions and stuff, but it would target dandelions over the things that I had planted, which I thought was funny because there's just this like constant, farmer versus rabbit, they're eating my carrots or roots or whatever. And like sometimes I would like throw root vegetables out there thinking that, oh, I'm gonna like give this rabbit a treat. And I throw a carrot out there and they just ignore it and eat dandelion flowers. I just thought that was fascinating. But anyway, yeah, you're just reminding me of that. Yeah, I mean, it in a sense, what's really cool about this examples that you're giving is these are like rewilding with animals, like giving an animal a diverse diet or providing these environments where they can actually migrate around and mimic their own ancestry. Oftentimes within a rewilding context, people have this mindset of like, I need to run away to the wilderness and become like a hunter-gatherer. And I'm like, okay, first of all, there's just not enough for people to do that. There's not enough food out there. But second of all, it's kind of shitty to just like domesticate these animals and then abandon them within a framework of domestication instead of like rewilding alongside these animals that we've domesticated, right? And I
Mm.
feel like what you're describing is sort of what I like hypothesize in my class of like this idea of like we can actually rewild the animals we've domesticated by changing our relationship and opening it back up and doing things like holistic grazing or mob grazing and that kind of stuff. Um, yeah, it's just cool to hear real world examples from y'all in terms of like what the selection of plants that they choose depending on season. That's really cool.
It
Yeah.
is, and like as Laura pointed as well, it's all about the right animal. If we took, to give it a human analogy, if you took like Usain Bolt, one of these top level absolute epitomes of like human peak performance, and put them on a really shitty diet or a low diversity diet, they wouldn't perform in the same way. But if I took some old, some person that maybe hasn't grown up in a city context or something, or maybe with like modern food products or food-like products, and take them and put them into a kind of high performance, specifically scientifically designed diet, they also might not thrive particularly well as well. So for us, the kind of genetics, so the particular breed of cattle is hugely important for us.
Mhm.
And the other thing as well is we if we see an animal, now it hasn't really happened yet, but if we see an animal that isn't well adapted to our system, then we step in and we also do what nature does is
Hmm.
we say, right, that's an animal that doesn't like it's maybe it's coming out of the winter and it's like laboring more than the rest, or maybe it just looks a bit cold and it looks like it's kind of lost that thrive and that vigor. Then we'll do what nature does is like we'll remove that from the system and we won't keep those genetics in our
Hmm.
herd. So we're playing the role of the predator in a number of ways.
Mhm.
Yes, we're bunching and moving to reestablish that predator-prey dynamic, which then has a direct relationship to the productivity and vigor of our grasslands. But we're also keeping an eye on animals to cull and to remove from the herd.
And this is where the holistic context part is so important. If you don't know what you are trying to achieve or what your kind of future, what you want your future kind of landscape to be potentially, um, you can't make those decisions. So for us, part of our context is to be zero input and is to fully outwinter animals. So that makes it very simple for us to select. And then also knowing that we're going to be finishing these animals 100% on grass and forage means that we need to have animals that will do well on that
Hmm.
diet.
Hmm.
There's animals that are continental, they're very large, that were not bred for this landscape, that are, ran in Ireland and they're kept in sheds and fed a lot of grain from around the world to get them up to a certain weight. And that's not a system that we can stand behind.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
similarly, if we were to take one of those bigger kind of continental breeds and try to put them into a system like ours,
A Belgian blue,
they wouldn't. They also wouldn't last, you know.
no,
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't like
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Um, yeah. So what are the challenges specific um to Ireland, in terms of this? Like what are challenges that you come across in trying to do this? I mean, I can imagine there's like economic drives, there's cultural limitations and governmental limitations. What stands in the way of more people doing this, or of you, being even more successful in what you do?
Mindset. It's always mindset from any farmer that I've spoken to. Um, and I suppose there's a lot behind that. We have, not to say that everything is colonialism's fault, but we had 800 years here of being sort of divorced from our land and our agency kind of taken away. That continued with the church and, very sarcastically, I could say Chagas, but it continued on. That, we have this land and there's almost like an extractionist mindset. I'm going to get everything I can from this land
Mm.
rather than, working in relationship with it. And then also the succession. So before your parents did this, they held onto the land and you're being told by the best scientists going that this is the way to do it, but you're still losing money.
Hmm.
Um, you often talk about the bell curve
Yeah.
in people's ability to kind of change. I'll let you like that bit. I'll let you talk about that.
So when I started doing this work, when I transitioned out of my previous career, I was looking for solutions. So I was fortunate enough that I'd left a career behind me. I had a bit of money, and and I had no responsibilities really. So I was able to take time to visit projects in North America and across Europe, the UK and Ireland, and I was visiting projects that I wanted to visit projects that inspired me. There was something about them. It wasn't necessarily the tools they were using or the approaches they were using, but it was kind of the why. It was trying to get under the hood to understand their philosophy. And then I came back here and started experimented and found a system that would work for me, for the lifestyle I wanted, and for the kind of general triple bottom line vision that I had for this bioregion. And then we began scaling up from there. So that's the kind of potted history, if you like. But the thing about the what I found was, and I was because I grew up in this community, I knew that to be evangelical wouldn't work. If
Hmm.
I was to go out and start broadcasting, and I found it, I found the solution, the kind of the great white hope of agriculture. That wasn't going to work.
Hmm.
But I also knew that it was really important that the conversation happen. You know,
Yeah.
um, and I never kind of wanted to be. 'Cause you meet advocates all the time that don't farm. I wanted to be a practitioner first, and to make
Yeah.
the mistake, come through that evolutionary term, and then speak from a place of experience. So that's kind of what we're doing now. But what I witnessed really really quickly was me being the scientist. I like to visualize data in graphs. And if you've ever seen me loose with a whiteboard pen, then be warned,
There'll be a
there'll
graph,
be a
I
graph.
see
whether you
one
like
behind
it or not.
you,
There
actually,
is.
on
There's
the wall.
But what I noticed was there was like a bell curve distribution, like a normal distribution that was it was it and this is a bell curve that I'd kind of developed over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of conversations with people on my travels, and also people that had visited us here in the farms and farming
Mhm.
events that I'd been to. And the general agricultural landscape that I was being exposed to during all those travels fell into three camps. So the fat part of the bell curve, the big bit in the middle, where 95% of the population reside, are the people for whom the current system is enough. It's ticking the boxes. And the reality of a lot of people in that population is that they have a second job. Now, in the Irish context,
Yeah.
they have a second job or other streams of income, and farming isn't their main source, but they're doing it because they had the land or it was handed down to them, or maybe they just like it or whatever. They're not. It would be nice to make a profit, but it's really difficult to make a profit in a commodity market. Bilateral trade agreements mean that we actually grow enough beef on the island of Ireland to feed ourselves three times over.
Mhm.
But the proportion of beef that we consume, which is of Irish origin, is about 23%. So
Bizarre.
where does the balance come from? And it's trade agreements. So we're
Yeah.
locked into a commodity market and all the political shenanigans that goes on there. But the other thing about the population in the middle is the pain isn't big enough to get them to seek
Hmm.
new ways of being, new ways of doing.
Not enough stimulus, but also not enough bandwidth as well
Yeah.
when
Hmm.
you're pulled from pillar to post.
Yeah, so when you're running between multiple jobs and you've got a mortgage to pay and you've a car payment to pay and you've got to go on that third holiday this year and all the rest of it, you have very limited capacity. And that's kind of the general avatar that I developed to kind of in my head to describe the middle band. The populations on either end are actually where I decided to focus my efforts on when it came to kind of regen advocacy. Um, One of those populations are the people like me or how I was 10 years ago. These are people that maybe came up in the conventional system and maybe they didn't. Maybe they're completely new entrants to farming, but they objectively look at a system and say, I don't want any part of that.
Hmm.
I want to define a new way to do this and to connect and part of that new way might be direct marketing to consumers. It might be a CSA model. It might be direct sales of beef. It might be perennial food production over annual. There's a number of different
Yeah.
ways to cut the cloth. But these are the people that they tend to be younger, although not always, but they do tend to be younger. And they look at the current system and say, no, that's not for me. And then the people at the other end of the bell curve, these are the people that are highly motivated to change because the current system has failed them. Typically, they're over leveraged,
Mhm.
meaning they're carrying too much debt in their operation. Typically, they're kind of approaching retirement, or that they're certainly over the halfway mark of the game. And the pain is becoming such that they're about to lose it all, and it's the last throw of the game. The clock is running down, you know, and these are the people that are highly motivated to change.
Or
And
potentially as well that they don't want to hand on a problem to later generations as
Yeah,
well.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
yeah, so these are the kind of three camps. So what we've done over the past number of years is we've kind of focused on the two fringe groups.
Hmm.
Just trying to, going into a conventional conference and trying to speak to a load of people that are highly leveraged and don't have the bandwidth and don't see the pain as a big enough problem. It's a really demoralizing place to be.
Oh yeah.
But the good news is that there's a whole new generation of people from both of those camps that are coming in and actually critically looking at operations. And it's like you start to there's a guy, a really fantastic progressive farmer. He's actually a dairy farmer in Limerick called Tom Stack. And Tom's got this great line in one of his videos, which is he was kind of looking for advice on grassland management. Well, back when he was a conventional farmer, he was looking for advice on like grassland management or something. And he said, I realized that everybody I was going to for advice was trying to sell me something. They were
Hmm.
either productizing the solution in the bottle or in an injection or in some kind of a trying to sell you a course or something, you know.
Hmm.
So for Tom, actually, it sounds like the his experience of the path to regen is very similar to ours in that it's one of empowerment.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I think, one of the things that I find fascinating is the zero input model, right? Like, which to me, I always think about like I've never taken out a loan, you know, in my life, and because to me it just didn't make any sense. Like, why would you take money and then have to, I don't know. I mean, I get why people do it because they don't have any, and you're in
Yeah.
theory, in theory, you'll be able to come up with a plan to pay it all back or whatever, right? But it's sort of that like taking in something that if it doesn't end up working out, then you owe all this money, right? You're in debt to it. And I think about that with land use, right? Where there's like, it's the same with this kind of input where you're using the land in a particular way, where you're requiring this kind of input. You're basically then degenerating the land that you're living on if you're requiring all of these inputs. And that's just not self-sustaining. And then also there's this element to me where I think, okay, wouldn't it make more money if you had zero inputs? But that's just not true either, because like you were saying, there's these like, there's cheap grain and there's these particular cows that sell for a lot of money, and just like the way that the whole system is set up, and it's just kind of it's just so bizarre to me that it exists at all. Um, anyway, I'm just
No,
lamenting.
it's interesting because there are parts to it, it's not just the zero inputs, it's the conversion of that,
Mm,
and
Totally.
also having a market. And
Right.
that's where I suppose the social media element comes in, that, maybe people that maybe our neighbors might not be our prime customer. Maybe our prime customers are, in another location in Ireland. And being able to have access to a market, which with the internet we all do,
Hmm.
we can access,
Hmm.
people at distance, where we need to. But being able to convert, I suppose the profit that you have from not shelling out for fertilizer, for grain, and being able to get everything that you need within your own farm gates means that, the cost associated with, selling going forward, you're less leveraged. So you're able to take more risks, and you don't also have
Hmm.
to play the volume game either.
mm.
Hmm. Yeah.
So we think about it. The way we think about it here on the farm is um, the characteristic of kind of modern capitalist system is one of linearity. So there's inputs on one end of the system and there's an output at the other. Um, and one of those outputs is what we term waste, which is like a very human-centric thing, you know.
Hmm.
And when we looked, to broader systems for inspiration, we see that like the notion of waste doesn't exist in nature because the output from one system becomes the input from another, and everything cycles around. So our job here on the farm is to critically look at our systems overall. This is the holistic part of holistic management, and through different lenses, we will see how well we're cycling. So this is the kind of language you use. Now, one of the lenses that we look at our farm system through is nutrients. So the lens of nutrient cycling, how well are pools of nutrients being liberated and move through this system? And what are the mechanisms that are at play? Similarly, with water, we do exactly the same thing. So the way to short circuit a water cycle is when a raindrop falls, is to get it off your property as quickly as possible. Whereas our adage here on the farm is where water runs, make it walk.
Mm,
And make it take the longest path possible, which is kind of a principle that was borrowed from permaculture.
mhm,
Make it take the longest path possible, and along that path, give it as many opportunities as you can to take enough energy out of it so that it wants to infiltrate and actually get straight back to the natural water cycle as quickly as possible, rather than just shooting it off
mhm,
into a drain. And the same is also true for value.
Mm.
So we're only here because the sun shone on a chlorophyll surface, and that's the basis of it all, you know. So our job is to create sunlight, or is to take sunlight, make sure all the relative cycles are in place and healthy and functioning in a manner that allows us to convert that sunlight into a saleable product as quickly as possible, but also with a minimum or ideally zero inputs. We're achieving that. The reality is, as our system gets more and more complex year on year, as we regenerate the landscape, we're growing essentially more profit per unit area, more feed per unit area, which means that the carrying capacity of our farm goes up and up and up. And the reality is we don't actually know where the limit of this is. So we're explorers in that sense. So that's the production side of it.
mhm,
And then the next line of it then is what happens from the point of production. Like when we take that animal on its last journey to the customer side. Now, if we sell into an international commodity market where there's hundreds of connections between us as primary producers and the consumer that could be halfway around the world, then the reality is very little of that value is retained within the farm gate, and almost none is retained within the local community by the time you dilute everything down. So what we choose to do is we choose to feed ourselves first.
mhm,
That always has to be, the farmer has to be the best
mhm,
fed
mhm.
person in any community.
Mhm.
Secondly, we feed our kind of family and friends and neighbors second. And then if there is any left over at that point, we will look to other direct channels such as the social media,
Mhm.
and we direct market beef as and when it becomes available. But the reality is, the animals that we've culled so far there's been no surplus because our network of friends and family are willing to pay a market price,
Mhm.
but to us, which is actually on balance no more expensive than what you would pay for a poorer quality supermarket product. But because there are so fewer links in the chain, we retain more of that value and it makes our whole enterprise more profitable. And
Mhm.
ultimately, they get the satisfaction of, the best quality beef on the planet, from just down the road, and they get to know that they're directly supporting the type of work that we're doing, and
Mhm.
people feel very engaged.
Yeah, but it circles back to the community building aspect of it. A farm isn't just a place for production. It's a place where people can build that community. And then obviously with the events that Lucy's working on as well, that it all kind of works together.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, there's I don't know if this is a question or just kind of a thought, but in James C. Scott's book, Seeing Like a State, he talks about how there's this kind of reductive aspect of land assessment where, a forest becomes the number of board feet within the trees, as opposed to
Mhm.
like all of the other living organisms that are thriving in a forest system. And then, if you cut down the forest, foresters are going to just replant trees. They're not going to recreate a forest, And here in the Northwest, there's loads of places that people call, national forest, for example, which is really just a managed tree farm.
Yeah.
And so when I was in Ireland, I was immediately able to see a lot of the managed tree farms, which is, funnily enough, a lot of the trees that are grown here in tree farms in the Pacific Northwest. Um, but I just am thinking about the land use that you're talking about, and part of this is, the economic side of growing cattle, raising cattle as that aspect of the economic value, but how much of the other value of things that are growing on your farm? When you talk about future oak, like it's not like the name of your business is cattle something or cow something, right? Like the fact that I think you have this word oak in there is to me shows there's a lot more going on in terms of the other aspects of living organisms that are in the system. And one of the things a friend of mine asked me a while ago was like, how come oak trees were never like industrialized for food production? Like grains when they have like better protein, fat composition, all this different stuff, carbohydrates and everything. And I was like, well, it's because they're not predictable. You can't predict an oak crop year to year because they mast every 2 to 7 years. And the whole point of the state has been to have these predictable outcomes with food. And that's not something that the state can put on its ledger the way it can decide a number of board feet when it's been grown in a monocrop or something like that. Um, yeah, I don't know.
Mm.
I'm just I guess that's more of a thought than anything. I'm just thinking about your system and the various
Yeah,
aspects of it that we've been talking about are the economic stuff, but there's so much more underneath
Yes.
that. And you've touched on it talking about like Lucy Wild Awake's programming that happens there and other things that they forge stuff. But yeah, do you want to talk a little bit about the other things that are happening there besides just this form of like how you economically engage with the outside system?
yeah. Whenever John and I went on our first date, he had a pretty big opener around his 500-year vision
Hmm.
um, for this area. And for me, that's where the future oak comes in.
Mm,
It's
mm,
we are just a sentence in a
Mm.
paragraph on a page in a book in the library of this place. And what we're trying to do is to build a solid foundation for we hate this word
yeah,
sustain,
yeah.
regenerative, regenerative systems,
Mhm.
which cattle are a part of that, but the tree systems are a part of that.
People.
People are a part of that. And it's not just our vision, we're kind of trying to craft what we can here, but ultimately the hope is that that will continue on and develop with the needs of the people and the ecosystem in which they inhabit as well.
For me, it's all about momentum. It's all about
Mm,
so our job is to kind of take stock first of all, go into observation mode, understand, look through those lenses, look through nutrient cycle, water cycle, community dynamics, um, take stock of where the system is at the moment.
mhm,
And then the North Star becomes building complexity, but with an eye to that triple bottom line. So, like we're all struggling to navigate our way out of the end of this
Yeah.
capitalist era.
mhm,
Um, so in the short term, in the very short term, it's super important that we're actually we're a profitable
Hmm.
operation because we have short-term needs that need to
Hmm.
be met.
Right.
But our kind of longer term vision, a medium term vision, actually, and when I say medium term, what I mean in my personal context is probably, 15 years out, is that the human system and the creativity element of it, because it's creativity really and different perspectives that actually knows no bounds. That's where the true long-term
mhm,
value lies.
Hmm.
And it's in these little sparks of collaboration that kind of pop up and spin off other cool, interesting projects around the place that we're looking really just to become some kind of a catalyst for that or some kind of a or whole to facilitate some kind of a forum where those kind of points of creativity can spark and can go off to create who knows what in the future. But the reality is, we're on a spinning rock that systems are out of whack. You need to build more resilience because we are seeing in my short lifetime, and I am younger than I look, in our short lifetime, like we are seeing massive shifts in weather pattern.
mm,
Like in the last 8 years, we had a ship go sideways on the Suez Canal, which cut off European supply lines and caused the price of shipping a container from China to Europe by 20 to 100x. Um, we had a war in the Ukraine, which is the breadbasket of Europe. So geopolitical instability is a big thing. We've had a global pandemic as well. So all of these things affect everybody, of course, but they particularly affect an island nation that
Hmm.
currently can feed itself, but willingly doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what comes back to our own kind of philosophy about feeding ourselves first, feeding our immediate community second, and then distributing the surplus after that.
Hmm.
Because yes, it's about short-term profitability, but it's actually about long-term resilience in the face of geopolitical instability, food shortages or food interruptions or food supply, um, and a changing climate, you know?
Hmm.
And ultimately, it can never just be us or our project. There needs to be the seeding of other projects to
Hmm.
build that resiliency.
Oh, for sure. And then, by the by, when we're talking about our other than human allies that are on this landscape as well, their kind of presence or their re-inhabitation of this area, and we were seeing it already,
Mm.
become symptomatic.
Hmm.
Just in the way that an oak will show up when you change the dynamic, your relationship with the land and the graziers, and how you're bunching and moving and applying the tool of rest appropriately. How the oak shows up in those conditions, the same way that woodpeckers show up, or red squirrels show up, or jays show up. These become a different expression of the
Hmm.
same system as that biodiversity and complexity builds.
Hmm. Yeah. Awesome. I am curious. You took my Rewilding 101 class,
Hmm.
like 5 years ago now, which is crazy. Almost 5 years, probably. And I'm just curious, like you mentioned in the class that it kind of changed a little bit of how you were going to be doing stuff on the land, and I'm curious what your thoughts are around that today, 5 years later.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think at the time, so five years is kind of pretty much halfway between where we are today and when I started this project. So you can imagine there's been like an exponential learning curve, and because a lot of the learning that has led to Future Oak Farm Project today wasn't neatly packaged. It
Mm,
was
mm,
it was kind of whispers of conversations here and snippets of books here, there, and YouTube videos and conversations at different events. Um, I when I came to rewilding your work, and then through Lucy of Wild Awake, and then I heard about the Rewilding 101 course, it was like, oh my God, this is exactly the same kind of principles-based practice that I'm seeing and
mhm,
actually beginning
mhm,
to evolve in my own
mhm,
kind of head, and which will define my relationship with this landscape. But here it is in a human sense, and the first sort of slap was the narrative that we were told about the human story,
mm,
through the years, and Rewilding 101 really forced me to kind of critically look at that again and actually realize that that narrative was just completely off, and it was so anthropocentric and so human centric, human dominated.
Mhm.
It was kind of a story of victory and domination rather than one of co-evolution.
mhm,
And that is so necessary because you can provide anybody with all, any kind of agriculturalist with all of the regenerative tools of the day. You can send them on all the courses you want and give them all the mentorship you want. But if they haven't been able to see themselves as rooted and part of a dynamic system instead of apart from a
mm,
dynamic
mm,
system,
mhm,
it's all for nothing. So
mm,
for me, Rewilding 101 was a reset just at the right time. And the fact that it was packaged in those kind of four deliveries with
mhm.
homework and active discussion, it
Did
was
you do your homework?
I did most of the time. It was great. And then of course, like, that kind of led on then to you know to kind of really getting serious about the conversations we were having
Mhm.
with Lucy at the time about bringing elements of that work here. And of course that's gone on since that, and has led to our Crunya Linsa events, which we've got, not like we're trying to define an outcome for them, but it's just really interesting to see who's showing up and
Mm,
what they're bringing and what questions are arriving with, and where the kind of spontaneous inspiration is striking to meet those challenges, because you can't script most of this creativity, you know?
Mm, mm-hmm.
Evolving before our
It is,
eyes.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
I
yeah.
think, it's funny. I've never had really travel bugs. When I was in my youth and all my friends were traveling, I was like, that's stupid. Civilization is going to collapse. I'm going to spend all my money on survival school lessons. And my friends are traveling, and now it's like I'm in my 40s and I feel like I have all of the survival skills I would think I need for any kind of emergency type situation. Like I had a friend who lived in France for 5 years, one of my best friends in high school. He lives back here now, but we were hanging out the other day, and he was like, I can't, I said, I can't believe I never came and visited you in France. Like, what the hell was I thinking? And he's like, I remember, I'll tell you. I was like, uh-oh. And he's like, you said you wouldn't come over here because you were afraid that civilization might collapse while you were here and you'd get stuck and you wouldn't be able to return home. And I was like, yep. Okay. I remember saying that. It's crazy. I just want to
Sounds
like
like
acknowledge that that was insane. And, like I fully recognize that that was silly. But it's just funny. Like now all I want to do is like travel and see all these different cool projects that are happening all around the world. And during the pandemic, I especially thought that I would never be going anywhere. And then
Mhm.
things calmed down. Lucy came out to Echoes in Time and was like, if I did one of these in Ireland, would you come? And I was like, well, I have to go now. You came all the way here. And then of course,
we were
yeah, it
glad
was
to see
really,
you here.
yeah, it
Yeah.
was amazing to be able to come and be at your place and see all of the phenomenal work that you're doing out there. I definitely have like FOMO for all these different projects because I don't really have the same kind of access, or I'm sort of a butterfly anyway. But it's really cool to be able to kind of see all these different people and help out where I can in their projects. So thank you for yeah, for doing all the work that you guys do over there, and it's a pleasure to come out and spend time there. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up our conversation? Any promos or anything?
Well, for us, well, I don't know about promos, but like my I guess one thing I would say just to your last point, like I so my previous career was in oil and gas exploration. It was very much part of the problem, and it was very much one of dominion. It was like we would, as an engineer, you would figure out ways literally to harness nature to put them into a pipe so that somebody else could productize it, and then you would leave, and very little value
Mm,
was retained by these communities that you were in, whether it's offshore and you're talking about sub-aqua communities, or whether it's onshore and it's a human community or an ecological community. Um, so I've kind of come through a bit of an arc, and I also went through a period where I thought, oh my God, it's all going to coin an American term I heard one time, to hell in a handbasket.
yeah.
And I went through a period of that as well, and where I am today, and actually, like I've witnessed the resilience of natural systems, and
Mhm,
I include human systems in that as well,
mhm,
and the ability for us to meet one another
Mm.
and to have that creative spark and actually create something that's new and wholesome and regenerative, beyond sustainable. Forget that word sustainable. We need to
mhm,
actually be much, much higher because
Mm.
it's entirely possible. And when I look at the challenges that we kind of all face now, as I perceive them, the core, the middle of the Venn diagram is people and community, and I
Mm.
feel very, very upbeat and positive
mhm.
about the capacity for us to evolve and adapt and change. And hey, like life might not look like it looked 20 or 30 years ago, and that's okay too. But on the whole, I'm very, very positive about it.
Yeah. Same. It's really exciting to be part of something that you don't know the conclusion of.
Mhm,
It does feel like being an explorer.
mhm,
Um,
mhm.
and you get to, especially with the events that we have on the farm, different people coming, you get to travel without moving, and learn different things from other butterflies, Peter. Um, it's an amazing thing. So keep flapping.
Yeah,
Yeah, thanks. I will.
good work, buddy.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you for joining us. There is a maybe a longer conversation at some point about wolves and the reintroduction
Mm.
of wolves. But I know that's a whole thing, so we
The whole
don't
thing.
have. But yeah, I saw wolf walkers and I was like, ooh, I need to talk to them about wolves. And I was like, nah,
Yeah.
that's a whole thing. Maybe sometime we'll have you back on to talk about wolves and reintroduction, which is an issue here too for ranchers and things. So
Mhm.
anyway, thank you for coming on the Rewilding podcast.
Very
Thank
welcome. Thank you
you.
so much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Rewilding Podcast. Check out the show notes to connect with my guest and for a list of resources that we mentioned in our conversation. If this episode inspired you, made you think more deeply, or gave you some new tools to use, make sure to subscribe and become a patron at patreon.com/Peter Michael Bauer. If you're new to rewilding or want to expand your perception of it, I recommend attending one of my Rewilding 101 workshops, which I offer both in person in Portland, Oregon, and online for those who live around the world via Zoom. You can check upcoming dates and register at rewildportland.com. Thanks for listening.